Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, imagine being forced to marry a stranger on a private jet, only to discover he's been holding your mother's secret for 20 years. Stay with us to find out what happens next. And if you love stories of unexpected love and redemption, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. The air inside the private jet was warm, almost suffocating. Dim golden lights lined the ceiling in narrow strips, casting a soft glow across the leather seats and the polished mahogany of the interior. But even in that muted luxury, I felt cold, like I was sitting at the edge of something vast and irreversible. The engine's hum droned beneath me, steady and low, like a secret being whispered I didn't want to hear. I sat rigid, fingers pressed into the hem of my skirt, trying not to shake. Across from me sat Ethan Black. He hadn't looked at me once since I boarded his jet. Not when I stumbled on the steps in my worn flats. Not when the stewardess offered me tea I was too nervous to take. Not even when he handed me the documents I now held in my lap. Marriage contract. To the man who owned half of Manhattan. To the man who owned my father's debt. To the man who had just purchased me like a signature at the bottom of a page. I tried to steady my breath. This isn't love, I reminded myself. This is debt. This is survival. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. My father had collapsed 3 nights ago in the kitchen of our little bakery, our last inheritance from Mom. The doctor said it was stress, compounded by exhaustion. But I knew better. It was the letters, the phone calls, the final notice from Black & Royce Holdings, Ethan Black's company. I was only 23, a small-town baker's daughter with flour always stuck in the folds of her apron. I had never been on a plane before, let alone inside a private jet with walls that smelled of cedarwood and expensive whiskey. I don't have all night, Ethan said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low and clipped, not cruel, but sterile. Like he was talking about a transaction, which I suppose he was. He reached forward and placed a sleek black pen next to the folder on my lap, the same folder I'd been staring at for the last 20 minutes. I need your signature. Once there, once at the bottom. That's it. I glanced at him. He was looking out the window now, one elbow resting on the armrest, fingers toying absently with his cufflink. His profile was sharp, sculpted cheekbones, a defined jaw, dark hair slicked back without a strand out of place. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for power itself. But there was something else, too. A weariness behind the composure. As if he'd been doing this, controlling, commanding, negotiating, for far longer than someone should. I looked down. The papers were smooth, the print formal, devoid of emotion. Legally binding marriage agreement, it said. 3 years, appearances, inheritance clauses, confidentiality. No room for error, no room for heart. I reached for the pen, but my hand faltered. A gust of turbulence shook the jet, and the folder slipped slightly from my knees. I bent down to retrieve it, only to catch a thin, square object sliding out from the side pocket of Ethan's open briefcase on the seat next to him. A photograph. I froze. It was old, faded at the edges, but I would recognize that smile anywhere. My mother. She was younger in the photo, standing beside a little boy with dark, messy hair and the same quiet storm in his eyes that Ethan had now. They were at the counter of our bakery, my bakery, laughing, over something on the table. I could almost smell the cinnamon rolls, hear my mom's soft humming as she baked at sunrise. I blinked. My throat tightened. Why did he have this? I reached for the photo, barely able to hold my hand steady. The edges were soft, as if it had been handled too many times. Ethan turned his head slowly. He saw it. And for the first time, his composure cracked. Just barely. But I saw it. The faint tightening of his jaw. the way his shoulders stiffened like someone who had just remembered how to feel. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. "That doesn't concern the contract," he said finally, his voice back to neutral, but thinner now. Controlled. I pressed the photo against my chest, holding it like a shield. "You knew her?" Silence. "She never mentioned you," I said. "Not once." Still silence. And then, softer. "She was important to me. A long time ago." I couldn't breathe. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the leather carpet might give him a better answer than I could. "She saved me. Your mother. When I was a boy, after everything fell apart in my family. She baked for me, talked to me, made me feel like I mattered. That photo, I carried it for 20 years. He looked up. She never knew I remembered. The cabin seemed to shrink around us. I was no longer just a girl being sold into a marriage. I was the daughter of someone who had meant something to this man. But I still didn't understand. Then why this? I gestured to the papers, the pen, the coldness in his voice. His eyes darkened. "Because life doesn't care about memory, Anna. It only cares about debt, and keeping what's left of it from breaking you." I didn't know if that was cruel, or honest, maybe both. My fingers hovered over the signature line. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But I signed. Once. Then again. The sound of ink on paper sealed my fate. I handed it to him wordlessly. He took it, tucked it away, and leaned back like it had never meant anything. I turned toward the window. Lights blinked on the wings outside. The city was far beneath us now, just pinpricks of gold in a sea of black. I should have felt empty, but I didn't. I felt like I'd just stepped into the center of a story I didn't understand yet, and somehow he was part of it. Forever, whether I wanted him to be or not. I didn't sleep. Even after Ethan disappeared behind the partition of the jet's private cabin, leaving me alone with nothing but the hum of the engines and the steady beating of my heart. Too loud in my ears. I couldn't close my eyes. I sat with the photograph on my lap, tracing the worn edges over and over with my fingers. My mother's face stared back at me, frozen in time. She looked happier than I ever remembered seeing her, her arm gently resting on the shoulder of the boy I now knew had become Ethan Black. I pressed the photo to my chest, shutting my eyes. What had she hidden from me all these years? Why had she never told me about him? About any of this? 100 questions swirled inside me, but there were no answers waiting in the dark. The jet eventually landed in New York just after dawn. The city looked different from this height. Glass towers gleaming under the pale pink sky, streets still quiet, as if the world itself hadn't yet woken up to what I had just done. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I stepped off the plane. Ethan stood by the car, waiting at the base of the stairs, his expression unreadable. A driver in a black suit opened the door without a word. Ethan didn't speak to me the entire ride. I didn't expect him to. He sat on his side of the car, scrolling through his phone as if I didn't exist, while I pressed my forehead to the cold window, watching the city blur by. It was so far from the life I'd known. My town didn't have buildings taller than 3 stories, didn't have limousines or skyscrapers or men in tailored suits who could buy someone's life with a signature. It hit me again, sharp and undeniable. I belonged to him now. At least on paper. But the quiet part of me, the part that still smelled cinnamon and butter when I closed my eyes, refused to believe this was how my story ended. When the car finally pulled up to a towering building in Midtown, I braced myself. The penthouse was just as I imagined, sleek, cold, immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, letting in light that felt too pale, too distant. The place smelled of cedar and leather, like the jet, but colder somehow. Less human. Ethan led me wordlessly through the space, stopping in front of a heavy oak door. "This is your room," he said. His voice was clipped, as if the words were too heavy to speak. He didn't explain anything more. No expectations, no warnings. He simply turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway clutching my small bag like a child. I pushed open the door. The room was beautiful. Soft gray walls, white linens, a window seat overlooking the city. But it didn't feel like mine. Nothing here did. I dropped my bag on the bed and sank into the corner chair, curling my knees to my chest. My mother's photo was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, holding it between my palms like a prayer. I remembered the last night. She'd stayed up late with me at the bakery. We had sat on the old wooden counter after closing, flour dusting our cheeks. She'd braided my hair and hummed one of her favorite old songs, something about waiting for morning, about hope rising with the sun. "Never let anyone make you smaller than you are, Anna," she had whispered, kissing my temple. "And never give your heart to someone who sees you as less than everything." I had nodded then, too young to understand. Too young to know that the world wasn't kind to girls who dreamed. I closed my eyes now, wishing more than anything I could hear her voice again. A soft knock broke the silence. I stiffened, my heart leaping into my throat. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Ethan pushed the door open a fraction, not stepping inside. "We leave in an hour," he said. "Be ready." I didn't respond. The door clicked shut again. I sat there for a long moment before standing on shaky legs, crossing the room to the small closet. Inside was a row of clothes, none of them mine. Elegant dresses, soft cashmere sweaters, designer labels I couldn't pronounce. A note hung on one of the hangers. "Wear what you like." No signature, but I knew who had left it. I touched the fabric of a simple navy dress, letting it slip through my fingers. It wasn't me. None of this was, but I put it on anyway. An hour later, I met him in the foyer. His eyes flicked over me once, quickly, without lingering, before he turned toward the elevator. The ride down was silent. We stepped into another car, this one smaller than before. I settled into the farthest corner, clutching my coat around. Ethan didn't look at me, but I watched him. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hands flexed slightly on his knees. He looked restless, like there was something he wasn't saying. I wanted to ask why he'd paid my father's hospital bills before I'd signed anything. I wanted to ask why he carried a photograph of my mother for 2 decades. But the words wouldn't come. We pulled up to a high-rise glass tower, the letters Black & Royce Holdings gleaming above the doors. A life I didn't belong to. As he stepped out, I stayed frozen in my seat. My voice caught before I could stop it. "Why are you doing this?" He paused but didn't turn around. "You signed the contract, Anna. You don't get to ask why." The door slammed shut behind him, and I sat there, feeling the weight of every silent word left unsaid pressing down on my chest like gravity. I didn't see him again for 3 days. I spent those days pacing the cold expanse of the penthouse, staring out over a city I didn't recognize. I cooked small meals in the oversized kitchen just to have something to do, but every bite tasted like nothing. Ethan left early every morning and returned late, never once coming to my door, never once checking if I was still breathing in this glass cage of his. And I didn't go looking for him, at least not at first. But the silence started to eat at me. I couldn't stop thinking about that photograph, about the way his voice had cracked when he'd spoken my mother's name, or about the hospital bills, the ones I knew I hadn't paid. He was keeping something from me, something bigger than this contract, bigger than the debt. bigger than both of us. I felt it every time I closed my eyes. So when I heard voices late that night, low and heated, coming from the study down the hall, I followed them. The door was slightly ajar. I stood there, breath held tight in my throat. Ethan stood with his back to me, fists clenched at his sides, shoulders like stone. Across from him was an older woman I didn't recognize. Silver hair twisted into a perfect knot, dressed in black silk like she'd walked out of a boardroom. "You should have told her," she snapped, her voice like ice shattering on marble. "You should have told her who you really are." "She doesn't need to know," Ethan bit back. "It changes nothing." The woman crossed her arms. "She deserves the truth, Ethan. After what you did to her mother. After what your father did to them all." My heart slammed into my ribs. Ethan turned sharply, his jaw tightening. "You will not speak of him." The woman stepped closer. "You think you can buy your way out of this? You think dragging that girl into your life erases what happened? She doesn't know," Ethan hissed. "And she never will." I didn't wait to hear more. I pushed the door open, my hands shaking. "Tell me what?" They both froze. Ethan's face drained of color. "Anna, tell me what, Ethan?" I pressed, stepping into the room, ignoring the older woman's wide-eyed stare. "Who are you, really?" He took a slow breath, as if gathering pieces of himself off the floor. "This isn't the time." "It's the only time I have," snapped, louder than I meant to. "You promised me nothing when I signed that paper. You left me in this place like I was invisible. But I am here. I am standing right in front of you, and you owe me the truth." His throat worked like he was swallowing broken glass. The woman, who I now guessed must have been someone close to his family, sighed softly and turned to me. "I'm Eleanor," she said quietly. "I raised him after his mother. After she died." Ethan flinched. Eleanor continued. "Your mother and Ethan, they were once everything to each other, long before either of you knew what that meant. Your mother saved him when his world fell apart. And he..." She paused, glancing at him. "He loved her more than anything." My knees nearly gave out. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible." "She never told you," Eleanor said, softly, stepping closer. "Because your father made her choose. Him, or Ethan. And she chose your family." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, she wouldn't have." Eleanor nodded slowly. "She did it to protect you, Anna. She walked away to give you the life she thought you deserved." I turned to Ethan, my vision blurring. "Is it true?" He stood there, breathing hard, every muscle in his body tense. "Yes." One word. One breath. And my whole world shifted. "You hated her for it," I whispered. "That's what this is, isn't it? That's what I am. A punishment. A way to make her pay." Ethan's face twisted, something like pain flickering in his eyes. "No," he rasped. "God, no, Anna, Then why?" My voice broke. "Why me?" He ran a hand through his hair, turning away like he couldn't stand the sight of me breaking in front of him. "Because I didn't know how else to keep you close." The room tilted beneath me. "You could have told me," I whispered. "You could have told me everything." His hands dropped to his sides, helpless. I didn't know how. Silence stretched between us, sharp and unbearable. I turned to leave, my heart cracking with every step. "Anna." I didn't stop, not until I reached my room and locked the door behind me. And for the first time since signing that contract, I let myself cry. Not for the life I'd lost, but for the story I'd never been told, for the man who had once loved my mother, and for the woman he'd turned me into without even meaning to. The city looked different in the rain. From the penthouse window, the streets below shimmered beneath the flickering glow of street lamps, puddles turning sidewalks into rivers of broken light. I stood there, forehead pressed against the glass, trying to steady the riot in my chest. I couldn't stay here. Not another night. Not after knowing the truth. I had been a pawn in someone else's unfinished story. A second chapter he never asked for. A cruel echo of a woman he had once loved and lost. And I hated how much that thought burned. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes, and slipped out the door without a sound. My hands trembled as I pressed the button for the elevator, my breath catching when the doors slid open. No one stopped me. Not the driver. Not the doorman. No one. By the time my feet hit the wet pavement outside, the skies had split wide open, the rain falling in sheets so heavy I could barely see. But I didn't care. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like him. Somewhere I could remember who I was before this all began. I turned corner after corner until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. I ducked into the shadows of an old brick alleyway, pressing my back against the wall, gasping for air. I slid down to the ground, hugging my knees to my chest. The rain soaked through my coat, clinging to my skin like a second punishment, and that's when I heard his voice. "Anna." I froze. He was standing at the mouth of the alley, soaked to the bone, chest heaving like he'd run just as hard as I had. His tie hung loose around his neck, his hair plastered to his forehead, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had just realized he was about to lose something he couldn't afford to. "Lose. Leave me alone," I choked out, curling tighter against the wall, but he didn't move. Not right away. The rain fell harder, soaking us both. The silence between us louder than any thunder. And then, without a word, he dropped to his knees in the middle of the alley, right there in the mud and water, like none of it mattered. I stared at him, breathless. "You think I planned this?" he rasped, voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. "You think I wanted to hurt you?" I shook my head, tears mixing with the rain on my cheeks. "I don't know what you want, Ethan. I don't even know who you are." He let out a sharp breath, raking a hand through his soaked hair. "I'm lost," he whispered. "I've been lost since the day she walked away, and when I saw you, again. God, Anna, I didn't know what to do with all of it." I bit my lip, my throat tight. "You used me." He flinched like I'd hit him. "I tried to keep you at arm's length," he admitted, voice cracking. "I told myself it was just a contract, just a debt to settle. But it's not. It's never been that." He crawled toward me, stopping just inches away, rain pouring down his face like it was washing him clean. He reached out, slowly, so slowly, like he was afraid I might disappear if he moved too fast. His fingers barely brushed mine. "Please," he whispered. "Come back." I wanted to scream. I wanted to push him away. But when I looked into his eyes, those dark, broken eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not for himself. For me. He wasn't chasing power anymore. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was chasing me. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe without him. I launched forward, my hands fisting in his soaked shirt, and he caught me, arms wrapping around me so tight I thought he might never let go. He buried his face in my hair, his breath warm against my ear despite the freezing rain. "I need you, Anna," he whispered, voice trembling. "Not the contract, not the company. You." My chest cracked wide open, and for the first time since that cursed signature, I let myself believe it might be real. I pressed my face against his neck, breathing him in, letting the storm wash everything else away. We stayed like that, tangled together in the rain. Two broken people finding something whole in the wreckage. And for the first time, I didn't feel trapped. I felt found. The next morning, the city woke slower than usual, blanketed in the soft gray of post-rain stillness. Ethan didn't say much after we returned to the penthouse the night before. He simply led me to my room, his fingers brushing, the small of my back like a silent apology, and left me to rest. But I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because something had shifted in me. And when he knocked on my door just after sunrise, I didn't hesitate. "We're going home," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to stand this close. "My home," I whispered, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He nodded. "Your father needs you." We left without ceremony. No driver this time. Just Ethan, in a dark sweater and jeans that somehow made him look more real than I'd ever seen him, behind the wheel of his black SUV. I sat beside him, staring out at the passing highway, clutching the hem of my sweater until my knuckles turned white. Neither of us spoke much during the drive, but the silence felt different now. Not heavy, not cold, just waiting. When we finally pulled up to the small brick house that had been my whole world for as long as I could remember, I felt my chest tighten. The bakery sign was still hanging above the door, the paint chipped and fading. But the windows were dark. The lights off. I swallowed hard, stepping out of the car. Ethan followed me up the steps, but when I reached for the door, I paused. "Wait here," I whispered, not looking back. He stopped, his jaw tightening, but he nodded once. I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first. Yeast, flour, the faintest trace of vanilla that had seeped into the walls over the years. I stepped inside, my breath catching when I saw my father sitting in his old armchair by the window, a blanket draped over his knees, his breathing slow but steady. I hadn't seen him since the night I left. "Dad," I whispered, my throat tightening. He turned, his head, his eyes brighter than I'd expected. "Anna," he rasped. His voice cracked on my name. I dropped to my knees in front of him, taking his frail hands in mine. "I'm so sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry I left." His fingers curled around mine, weak but steady. "You did what you had to do. Sweetheart, you saved us." I shook my head, tears burning my cheeks. I didn't want it to be like this. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Neither did I. I helped him to the kitchen, guiding him to the old wooden table that still had scratches from when I was little. I filled the kettle, boiled water, and made tea the way my mother used to, strong and sweet, with just a touch of honey. As I stirred, my eyes drifted to the drawer beside the stove, the one where she used to keep her recipe cards. I pulled it open, half expecting to find nothing but old notes and scraps of paper. But there, tucked between two faded cards, was an envelope. I recognized her handwriting immediately. My name. I slid it out, my hands shaking as I broke the seal. "Anna, if you're reading this, it means you've had to face something I never wanted for you. I wanted to tell you the truth 1,000 times, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid you'd carry my mistakes like they were your own. Ethan Black was once the boy I thought I could save. He made me believe in things I never thought I deserved. But life pulled us apart, and I chose a safer path. I chose your father. I chose you. I never stopped wondering if I made the right choice. But if you ever find yourself standing in front of Ethan again, I hope you'll see what I saw all those years ago. A boy worth loving, if only someone is brave enough to stay. Don't be afraid to love, Anna. Let it set you free. Mom, I pressed the letter to my chest, sobbing softly into the worn paper. Felt a presence behind me before I heard his voice. I wasn't supposed to come inside, Ethan whispered from the doorway. I know, I rasped, turning to face him with tears still on my cheeks. But I'm glad you did. He crossed the room slowly, stopping just short of touching me. I didn't know she'd left that for you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. She wanted me to find my own way. And I think she always knew it would lead me back to you. He reached out, brushing his knuckles against my cheek, so softly I thought I might fall apart all over again. Come with me, I whispered, grabbing his hand, pulling him toward the table where my father sat, watching us with quiet eyes. Ethan knelt beside him, something breaking in his face as he reached for the old man's hand. I'm sorry, Ethan whispered, for everything. My father nodded, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. And just like that, the past didn't feel so heavy anymore. We sat there together, the three of us, as the kettle whistled softly in the background. And for the first time, I felt like I'd come home. We didn't return to New York right away. Ethan stayed with us in the little house by the bakery, not as a stranger this time, not as a man who owned my life on paper, but as something different. He helped me carry groceries, sat beside my father in the living room, listening to his stories like they were gold. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was never about business, never about contracts. Only small things, like how my mother used to hum when she baked, or how I had the same stubborn wrinkle in my brow when I was thinking too hard. I caught him looking at me more often now, not with that cold, unreadable mask he wore when we first met, but with something softer, something I almost didn't trust. Almost. I told myself not to fall for it, not to mistake kindness for something more. But every night when I watched him sit at the kitchen table with my father, every morning when I found him waiting with a cup of tea just the way I liked it, I felt the walls I'd built start to crack, and it terrified me. So when the call came, his driver letting him know the contract's deadline was approaching, I felt the ground shift beneath me all over again. He told me we'd leave in the morning. But that night, as I stood by the window watching the moonlight stretch across the old wooden floors, he came to me, quiet, careful. I didn't turn when he entered the room. I didn't need to. I felt him stop just behind me, his breath warm against my shoulder. You don't have to come back with me, he whispered. I froze. You signed a contract, he continued, his voice low and rough. But it doesn't matter anymore. You've done enough. You've saved your father. You can walk away, if that's what you want. I turned slowly, searching his face. You're letting me go? I asked, my voice trembling. His jaw tightened, pain flickering in his eyes. I never wanted to keep you this way, he rasped. Not when I knew. I never deserved you to begin with. I swallowed hard, my chest aching in a way I hadn't expected. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt free. But all I felt was hollow, because I realized in that moment, it wasn't the contract holding me here anymore. It wasn't the debt. It wasn't the guilt. It was him. I reached out, curling my fingers into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer until our foreheads touched. And if I stay? I whispered. He didn't move, didn't breathe. I don't want you to stay because you have to, he said, voice cracking. I want you to stay because you choose to. I felt my heart stutter, every breath like a promise waiting to be made. I thought of my mother, of the letter she left me, of the way she'd walked away from the boy who once made her believe in love. I thought of the way she'd told me not to be afraid. And for the first time, I wasn't. I cupped his face in my hands, feeling the way he leaned into my touch like he'd been waiting a lifetime. "I choose you," I whispered, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Not because I have to, but because I want to." His breath hitched, his hands sliding around my waist like he couldn't believe I was real. "Anna." I silenced him with a kiss. Soft. Sure. Not because I was brave, but because I was done being afraid. He pulled me closer, wrapping me in his arms like he'd never let go again. And for the first time, it wasn't about a contract. It wasn't about debt. It wasn't about revenge. It was about us. About finding something worth fighting for and choosing it together. We returned to New York 2 days later. But something felt different this time. It wasn't the city that had changed. It was me. I didn't walk into the penthouse like I was stepping into a prison anymore. I walked in holding Ethan's hand, his thumb brushing slow, steady circles against my skin, as if he couldn't bear to let go. He didn't say much during the ride back, but his hand never left mine, and that said more than words ever could. By late afternoon, the city was washed in amber light. The sun hung low, painting the skyline in hues of gold and fire. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, staring out over the city like it held every answer he'd never dared to ask. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, my heart pounding softly in my chest. He looked lost, and I knew that look too well, because I had worn it myself. I crossed the room slowly, stopping just behind him. He didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders tense, like he knew I was there, but didn't trust himself to face me yet. I reached out, slipping my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against his back. His breath hitched, sharp and raw. "I'm still here," I whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." He turned slowly, his hands coming up to cradle my face, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them, but not cold. Never cold again. His jaw clenched like he was holding back something too heavy to carry alone. "I've spent my whole life building walls," he rasped, "trying to prove I didn't need anyone, that I didn't need love." My breath caught. "But you," he whispered, his thumb brushing the corner of my mouth like a vow. "You walked through every wall I built, and I didn't even see it happening." My throat burned, my chest tightening with every word he wasn't afraid to say anymore. He took a shaky breath, then sank to his knees right there, the golden light pooling around us like a blessing we hadn't dared to ask for. I gasped softly, my hands trembling at my sides. "Ethan," he looked up at me, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve you, Anna. I never did. But I'm done running, done hiding, done pretending this isn't the only thing I've ever wanted." Tears blurred my vision. "You've changed me," he whispered, his voice so raw I felt it in my bones. "You've made me believe in something I thought I lost a long time ago, and I can't live without you." I sank to my knees with him, cupping his face in my hands, my heart shattering open, in the best way. "And I can't live without you either," I whispered back. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could feel every beat of his heart slamming against mine. We stayed there, tangled together in the golden light, two people who had fought every reason not to love and lost in the best way. And when he finally kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was everything. Slow, steady, real. His hands tangled in my hair, his breath trembling against my lips as if he was afraid I might vanish if he let go. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine, his voice nothing more than a breath. Will you stay? Forever? I smiled through my tears, pressing my hands to his heart. I already have. 1 week later, the penthouse didn't feel so cold anymore, not when the kitchen smelled like cinnamon again. I stood by the stove, stirring the old recipe Mom used to make when I was little. Strong, sweet tea with honey and a pinch of cloves. Ethan leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled up, watching me with a look that made my heart ache in the best way. He fit here, somehow. Not as a stranger. Not as the man who once bought my name on a contract, but as something real. Something I never dared to hope for. I carried the tray into the living room where my father sat by the window, wrapped in a soft blanket Ethan had bought the day we brought him here. He smiled up at me, his eyes clearer now, his breathing steadier. Ethan followed, sitting beside me on the edge of the couch, his hand finding mine beneath the tray. We sipped our tea in silence for a while, the morning light pouring through the windows like a quiet blessing. And then, I remembered the letter, the one I hadn't dared to finish reading. I reached into the drawer of the coffee table, pulling out the envelope with Mom's handwriting, the paper worn soft at the edges from where my fingers had traced it over and over. I took a deep breath and unfolded the last page. Anna, if you've found your way to this letter, it means you've already faced more than I ever wanted you to. I hope you know, my sweet girl, that you have always been braver than you believe. I used to think walking away from Ethan was the hardest choice I ever made. But I see now, it wasn't a choice at all. It was fear. Fear of losing myself. Fear of losing you. But you are not me, Anna. You have a heart bigger than I ever dared to dream for myself. And if you've found someone who sees that in you, someone who fights to stay, not because they have to, but because they choose to, then promise me this. Promise me you'll let love win. Not for me. Not for the past. But for you. With all my heart. Mom, I folded the letter with shaking hands, pressing it to my chest as tears filled my eyes. Ethan reached for me, pulling me into his arms without a word. He didn't need to ask what the letter said. He already knew. Leaned back, resting my forehead against his, our breaths tangling in the quiet morning air. My mother loved you, I whispered. He nodded, his voice breaking. And I loved her. I cupped his face, my thumbs brushing the tears he didn't bother to hide anymore. But I love you, I whispered. And I'm not afraid. He let out a shaky breath, pulling me closer, his voice nothing more than a promise against my skin. Neither am I. We sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the world outside fading to nothing. And when I looked up at him, really looked, I didn't see the man who had once owned my future like a name on a contract. Saw the man who had fought for me, who had let me choose, who had chosen me right back. We spent the rest of the day in the kitchen, baking the old recipes Mom left behind, filling the penthouse with warmth I never thought I'd find here. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, covered in flour by the time we finished, laughing softly every time I smudged dough on his nose. That night, we sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars. He pulled me into his lap, wrapping his arms around me, his lips brushing the top of my head. You're my home, he whispered. My family. My forever. I turned in his arms, cupping his face, my heart so full I thought it might burst. And you're mine, I whispered back. We stayed there, tangled together in the quiet hum of the city. The letter resting between us on the table. A memory of the past. A promise for tomorrow. And when the morning sun rose again, I knew without a doubt we had found our way home. Together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt journeys to life, stories of love, hope, and second chances. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.